Welcome to episode 5 of the Chall podcast. I'm Preston Byers, and I'm here with Justin Binkowski. And today we're going to be talking about the upcoming second stage of the Call of Duty League, which begins on Thursday, March 18th, with the Toronto home series. Um, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm tired, but we got some Call of Duty to talk about, so looking forward to that.
Yep. So this, home series don't really matter because we're not, the teams aren't traveling as much. But yeah, so we have 10 matches this week. Groups, as always, we're going to do 5 teams in Group A, 5 teams in Group B. The teams were drawn on a group selection show, so teams selected which teams they wanted to play. That's right.
Yeah, they went back and forth,
Yeah.
and it was like a 4-minute video CDL posted. It's kind of funny. They just show like one representative from each team, and they had like FaZe put Optic in Dallas's group. Dallas put, I think, the Thieves in FaZe's group, and then those teams just keep going back and forth until we got all the teams sorted into their pools for stage 2.
Yep. And later we're going to talk about Toronto's roster change. I don't believe they've announced their replacement, but we're assuming that Insight would take Methods' spot. And we actually had some roster mania today with Parasite being released by London and Paul X being signed in his place. And we also have new maps in the CDL rotation, Apocalypse Hardpoint and Express S&D. But before we do that, we're going to talk about Stage 2, the first week of matches. If you haven't listened to our podcast before, we go match by match, give our predictions and our thoughts on each of the matches that week. We actually did pretty well in Stage 1. I believe we were both over 70% win percentage, so actually pretty good. But yeah, we're going to start with Stage 2, Week 1, which again starts on March 18th. The first match is actually a pretty big match, Atlanta FaZe versus the New York Subliners. FaZe obviously won every single match of theirs in Stage 1, and they won the Stage 1 Major, and New York surprised some people and finished third in the Major. So who do you got between FaZe and Subliners, Bink?
I think it's really tough to pick against anybody, or it's tough to pick against FaZe right now.
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, New York did show up and surprise some people at the last major, came in third place, but FaZe just looked like the best team in the game, so I'll go FaZe 3-1.
Yeah, I'll say FaZe 3-0. I mean, it really doesn't matter in that
No.
sense because and I just pulled the schedule up on our screens. Uh, I don't know, like it's like you said, it's really hard to pick against FaZe. FaZe has been dominant in essentially every game mode. Control, I think, is statistically their worst game mode, but they were still winning about 70% of their controls, and the Subliners haven't looked really dominant in any single game mode to kind of counteract that. But yeah, I think FaZe should take this unless kind of this meta change kind of slows down their momentum or something. And next we have Florida versus Seattle. Both of these teams underachieved in Stage 1. Seattle much more. They finished last at the major. I believe they finished second to last in their group, or maybe last place in their group. But either way, I believe they won one match total in Stage 1. Florida did a little bit better, but as a team with some really good players, including Skies, who's an MVP candidate last year, and Awakening, who was a late Rookie of the Year candidate last year. They didn't look too hot. They did win a few matches at the major, but overall they didn't look great in Stage 1. So who do you have between the Mutineers and the Surge, Bink?
Definitely going Mutineers in this one. I think Seattle, clearly based on what we saw in Stage 1, has some stuff they have to work on.
Mm-hmm.
Like you were touching on, Seattle went 1-4 in Group A in Stage 1. Their only win was against London, who are the only winless team in the league right now. So not sure how much we can really take away from that, but I think that might be depending on how much people are talking about Seattle, it might be like in that conversation of people are talking about London's struggles like extensively because they're in last place. They haven't won a series yet, but Seattle's not that far ahead of them because they've only won one series against that aforementioned team. So they definitely have some stuff that they have to work on. It's obviously we're not going to know until we see them in action if they've been able to fix any of their issues from stage 1 to stage 2. Maybe the shift with the meta and these new maps might help them out a little bit, but I still think Florida has more. I don't want to say they have more talent, but they look like a better team at this point in the game, especially based on Florida's performance in the major, where they might have struggled in group play during stage 1. They technically had the same record as Seattle in group play, but Florida showed up, and they were one map away from knocking out New York in the losers bracket, who went on to finish in third. So, yeah, I think Florida takes this one. I'll say 3-2, just because it'll be interesting if we see more search.
Hmm. I would say Florida 3-0. Florida's. Um, let's talk about Seattle just real quick. I think they obviously had their issues last year, and it was kind of a meme, like someone help Sam or something like that, or get Sam some help. But he hasn't looked incredible so far this season. I'm not sure if that's like totally on him or if it's just like I don't know. I think Octane, uh, he's a really good player, not a great search player, and Seattle is not a great search team. But I don't believe that's their big issue. I think it's control. I don't think they've won a single control map this season,
Well,
which that's an issue. I mean, that's only 6 controls, or yeah, about 6 controls. Um, but to go 0-6, it's it's obviously really bad, and they're not excellent in hardpoint or search, so they don't really have anything to make up for that. Florida, I would say, has a much higher ceiling with
for
Awakening,
sure.
Skies. Those are two potential MVP candidates if they're on fire. And Awakening is on fire. At least he was at the major. Um, like you said, they were a map away from knocking out the Subliners, who finished third at the major, and nobody really stepped up other than Big Wake in that series. So if they have Skies or Neptune, who is a Rookie of the Year candidate, if one of them step up and help Awakening, they should be fine, I think. So yeah, I'll go with Florida as well. Those are the only 2 matches we have on Thursday. And then we have 2 matches on Friday, the first of which is the Los Angeles Thieves versus the Toronto Ultra, who will be debuting a new lineup, like a new addition into their lineup, who we are assuming will be Insight, who has been their sub all season. They benched Methods last week and did not announce a replacement, but Methods took his Insight's place on his Challengers team, and Insight's tweets have been kind of hinting that he's been practicing with the team, and I think there's been some screenshots of him practicing with Toronto. So we're assuming that Insight will be making his debut on Friday against the Thieves. But who do you got? LA versus Toronto.
I think I have to take the Thieves in this one. There was also some speculation of potentially Temp being benched for Venom, one of the
Mm-hmm.
Leicester guys. That doesn't seem like that's coming to fruition, at least not now, if ever. I think Kenny tweeted out like this is false or something like that in response to one of the rumors. So, regardless, Toronto's going to be debuting a new lineup. It most likely is going to be Insight. It seems like the logical substitution at this point, even if they haven't announced it yet. But regardless, they're still going to have a new lineup, which means they're going to have less practice than some of these other teams, particularly like Thieves, who've been around since the off season. So the Thieves should take this one. I'm going to say 3-1. Maybe Toronto ekes out that first hard point or something. I'm not really sure, but I'll go through Thieves 3-1.
Yeah, I'll say the LA Thieves as well. I don't, Toronto, maybe there's a honeymoon period, and they come out of the gates really hot with insight. We don't really have the luxury of seeing how teams are practicing, and if Toronto is doing really well in scrims with insight, it's obviously a very controversial a change to swap out Methods, who apparently is the face of the franchise. If you saw that billboard on Twitter, um, so it's a bold move. Toronto's, I don't know if they're known to do bold moves, but they're definitely not afraid to do it.
Okay.
Um, so I don't know. It's really hard to even predict this match with a new person coming in. And 4v4 roster changes, it's a bigger change because obviously there are fewer people on the map, and every player has the potential to make a bigger impact. But we'll go with LA for this one. And yep, that's
I,
what are you saying?
I was just gonna say, I think assuming it is Insight who makes his pro debut in this match, and assuming he slots into that main AR role to fill in for Methods, he's got a tough test right out the gate. He's got to go up against Slasher, who's one of the best ARs in COD history. So it'll definitely be a good chance for us to see what he's capable of if he, in fact, does make his debut like everyone's expecting.
Agreed. The last match on Friday, Paris Legion versus Minnesota Rocker. Both these teams, I believe, lost in the second round of the losers bracket at the first major. Um, Minnesota had a very hard stage one in terms of hardpoint. Paris, they, I think I put this in the group chat. Or maybe I tweeted it. I'm not entirely sure, but I said that they're a good team that just kind of pisses away their opportunities because they had the chance to beat FaZe in group play, and I believe they choked 2 maps, and I believe they lost to Florida as well, and they had a lot of opportunities to beat Florida. I wrote that recap. They were up, I think, 60 points in that last hard point, and they got 18 or so points on the last 2 hills, and Florida got about 100. So that was a tough loss for them to end their first stage. But who do you have between the Legion and the Rocker?
I think we might finally have a different pick for this one. I'm going to go with Paris. I'll say Paris 3-1. Kind of similar to what you were touching on earlier. Minnesota has had their struggles in hard point. Who knows if they'll continue with the shift in the meta, new maps, all of that. But just based on what we've seen so far, I think Paris is a better hard point team. So, and Paris has had their moments in search, and especially they've looked good on Miami search, if memory is serving me correctly. So I think if Paris doesn't let it get to game 5, they should take this one 3-1. If it gets to game 5, Minnesota might be able to clutch up, but I'm going to go with Paris 3-1.
I'm going to go with Minnesota. I think they're one of the best search teams in the league. I
For
think
sure.
their early season struggles in hardpoint are a bit of an anomaly. I don't think that they're great. I don't think you can actually get to their record if you're a great hardpoint team, to be honest, but I don't think they're as bad as their record would suggest. But their search prowess, I think that's undeniable at this point. And as long as they maybe can pick up a control and force a game 5, I think that they would win this series. It's an interesting series because Minnesota really, if they showed really like a lot of potential. They beat Dallas in their second match after losing to LA Thieves, and then I believe they lost to the Subliners as well. So yeah, so they would have to have lost to the Subliners, right?
Minnesota?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that the one where they got stomped by New York?
Yeah, it was after they had the quick 3-0 against London, and they beat Minnesota 3-0, I believe. Yeah, if I'm
Yeah.
remembering correctly.
So Minnesota had ups and downs, like beating a team that went to the major final in their second match, but losing to New York in pretty embarrassing fashion in a really quick 3-0. I think if they can just smooth it out and find a groove, I think they're a top six team.
Yeah, I think one thing that's worth pointing out too is that both of these teams came in fourth place in their groups for stage one. I
Mm-hmm.
believe Minnesota went 3-2, and then Paris went 2-3
Yep.
in their groups, but they still came in fourth place, which means they were slotted into that second round of the losers bracket, and then both of them lost their only match there in that round to Paris lost to Florida and Rocker lost to Ultra, and that's the only match they played in the major. So we really haven't seen a lot from them recently because they were one and done at the major. So I think that's something to look out for. We haven't really seen much from them, but I feel like Minnesota, just because they have the pieces there of like Attach and Priesta, kind of like that phase, World War II style team where they had their struggles and they worked through it in the season. Like they might have that mindset on this team. Like it's like, okay, it doesn't seem like Minnesota's pressing a panic button or thinking about making any changes right now. At least we haven't heard anything if they are. So that could be a sign of good things to come for them. It might not be, throwing out the white flag. They're gonna grind through these issues, whatever's going on, and try to work through and become a better team, which is something I personally like to see from teams instead of, I know the amateur scene's kind of a mess in terms of teams always changing rosters week after week, but in my opinion, chemistry is super important. So if you're able to stick to playing with the same guys and work on your issues, build that chemistry and synergy, it should lead to better results. So that's something that Minnesota could build on moving into stage 2 and even later in the season, depending on how they perform in this stage. But I still think Paris, right now for me, if they're able to take the hard points, they should be able to take the series.
Yeah, I actually don't doubt Paris's ability to win this series. At the beginning of the season, I definitely did. I did not believe in this roster at all. I thought they were just kind of a ragtag group. They were pushed together. It didn't seem to fit, but they've surprised me greatly. Like I said, I thought they should have beaten FaZe, and that was, other than the Optic match, that was the only time that FaZe seemed to be really tested. Simp looked off in that series. I'm not sure if that was a result of something Paris did or if that was something on his end, but he had horrible, like I think 2 horrible games in that series, and Paris just threw away some search rounds, which if they didn't, they probably could have beaten FaZe in Game 5. I know that they got 1v3'd by Simp, they got 1v2'd by Celium to end the game. That's 2 rounds that you should not lose, and they did. But I think they're a good team. I think Minnesota is a good team. They just need to figure out how to even just go even in hardpoint and keep up that search. And yeah, so it's a very interesting match to end Friday.
And I think, real quick, I didn't want to cut you off, but with the meta change, it'll be interesting to see, in particular, how Classic performs. I know he's always been that guy in the past who I don't want to say like uses the off meta gun, but he's kind of like that flex role where he can use other guns. He's not, just sticking to a sub or AR. So he might be the guy who slots into that QBZ role, depending on how often we see the QBZ. Not really sure about that, but that could be something to keep an eye on in this match and moving forward.
Good call. On Saturday, we have the first match is Optic Chicago versus Paris Legion. Optic finished 4th at the CDL Major after losing to the Dallas Empire in a Game 5 Round 11 in the winner's bracket, and then getting swept by the New York Subliners in the losers bracket in a really quick, really surprising series. Who do you have between Optic versus Paris?
I feel like you got to go Optic. Obviously, they didn't have the ending they wanted to have to that Stage 1 Major after, they beat They swept actually the Subliners to kick off the winners bracket, and then they end up getting swept down the loser bracket by that same team. So that's definitely not the way Optic wanted to go out, but they might be back with a vengeance. And most notably, this is a rematch from Stage 1 group play in which Optic 3-0'd Paris. So I'll give Paris a map and say Optic 3-1.
I'll say Optic 3-0. I think we both agree that Optic is a really good team. They took FaZe to map 5. They were the only team to do that. Dallas, who got to the major final, they looked to be no match for FaZe at all in the, I believe, 8 maps or something like that, or 10 maps, 5-2 and then 3-0.
It was 8-2, yeah.
So that in those 10 maps, Dallas could not compete with FaZe, but Optic could in everything but search. In search, they were outclassed by FaZe, but you would imagine that they would fix a lot of that, even though FaZe has looked incredible in that game mode. But the fact that Optic even got to a Game 5 with FaZe gives me a lot of optimism that this team is not to be messed with in Stage 2. And in this group, I think they can really do a lot of damage. I was surprised to see them lose to Subliners like a lot of people, especially after sweeping them in the winners bracket. But with Garrison being taken out of the rotation, which is the S&D map that they lost to Subliners, and Apocalypse being added in, I think Express being added in place of Garrison, I think we could see Optic even improve their search game, which is not their strongest, but definitely they're not a weak team in that regard. So it'll be interesting. Paris is, like we said in the last match, they're a very good team. I don't know if they'll be able to beat Optic though.
Yeah, and just real quick too, you kind of touched on it, but in that series with Optic in New York, the first map was Crossroads Hardpoint, which is now been replaced by Apocalypse, and then map 2 was Garrison Search, which is being replaced by Express. So I believe at the time they were talking on the broadcast, or maybe someone said it on Twitter, I don't really remember it, but it was maybe like the first time New York had been playing that, and like the second time.
Yeah, it was.
It was something that, like, both teams hadn't played it, hadn't had a lot of reps on those maps, so could have been Optic experimenting with their map pool or something. Which I don't know if the major loser semifinals is the time to be doing that, but that's another argument for another day. But yeah, so the map pool changes could benefit Optic, and I've seen them, because obviously they actually stream some of their scrims. So I saw the other day they were scrimming the Thieves on Apocalypse, and I believe Scump uploaded a YouTube video where they were playing the brief Wester team with Decimate that didn't last very long. But so they're testing out Apocalypse. I wouldn't be surprised. Maybe Optic is one of the first teams, depending on what happens the first couple of days, to try out Apocalypse. But it could be one of the popular maps, and we might see it more often. I don't know. But yeah, so that's definitely something. If Optics looked good all year, aside from that one hiccup there in their series against New York, so I think they're going to perform well again in Stage 2.
To clarify what you were saying about Crossroads, Hardpoint, and Garrison and S&D, before that match against the Subliners, Optic had played Crossroads, Hardpoint once, and that was
played against the Thieves.
Yeah, the series before they played in that. And then they had never played Garrison S&D.
That's what it was, yeah. So it might have been a heat check. They were like, oh, damn, we beat the Thieves on Crossroads. Let's just run it back, and it didn't work out.
And I think Subliners used vetoes to their advantage, because they were like, well, obviously the series where we got 3-0 didn't work, and we don't really know what they look like on these maps, so like, let's try it out, let's see what happens. Or maybe they really had a good solid plan going into that. We don't really know, but it doesn't really matter for Optic now, because they don't have to deal with those two maps. And it'll be interesting if we get vetoes all weekend long to see how teams react to Express and Apocalypse being added in. if teams are vetoing those maps, or if any of their vetoes would change based on the new additions.
Yeah, I hope we get to see that veto selection again. If you're talking about like on broadcast, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool. So I don't know if they're going to keep doing that, but I certainly hope they do.
Yep. Florida Mutineers versus the Minnesota Rocker. We've talked about both of these teams already. Who do you have between the Mutineers and Rocker?
I'm going to go Florida 3-1. I think this will be a really close match, though, either way, regardless of which team wins. Unless, Florida just, like, flips a switch and becomes that, like, top 4 team that a lot of people expected coming into the season. I think this should be a close match either way, but I'm going to go with Florida.
I'll go with Florida as well. I think Rocker should take the search, although Florida is not a bad search team.
Yeah.
But if Minnesota is able to take either that one of the hard points or that control, that really changes the series, because, I mean, if Minnesota takes a hard point off of you, odds are, from what we've seen, you'll lose the search as well. I mean, it would kind of suck to go down 2-0 to Minnesota, but I don't think that'll happen. I think Florida will win that opening hard point, lose the search, and then win the control and the second hard point.
Yep, that's what I'm thinking. If, Minnesota is able to take a hard point, that especially, map 1, that could, kill momentum that Florida has, and that could be the recipe for Minnesota's success, but I'm still going to go with Florida.
Mm-hmm. The last match of Saturday is the Dallas Empire versus the Seattle Surge. We talked about the Surge early on, how they were pretty disappointing in Stage 1. Dallas obviously got to the CDL Major Grand Finals. Who do you have between the second team versus the team that finished tied for last?
Yeah, I don't think we have to talk about this one for very long. So Dallas 3-0. This is a rematch that we saw in group play in Stage 1. That was also Dallas 3-0. Just to go through real quick, Crossroads hardpoint was 250 to 98 for Dallas. Miami Search was 6-2 for Dallas, and then Garrison Control was 3-1 for Dallas. So not exactly a close series. If you look at the schedule right now, this is the only match we're going to see Dallas play this week, and I don't think we're going to have them on stream very long. This should be a quick 3-0 in my opinion.
Yep, agreed. Sunday, March 21st, the first match is the Los Angeles Gorillas versus the New Look London Royal Ravens. LAG, they shocked a lot of people by upsetting the Thieves in a rivalry match in the winners bracket. And then I believe they lost both of their next matches. They got kind of wiped by FaZe, but that's not that's not real weird for anybody. And then they lost to, who do they lose to in the losers bracket?
Let me look.
But
it would have been New York, right?
Yeah, maybe.
Trying to pull up the bracket. Yeah, they lost 3-1 to New York.
Yeah. So after 3-0ing LA Thieves, they lose 3-0 to Atlanta, 3-1 to New York, and they were out of the major with a top 6 finish, which is pretty good considering not a lot of people thought they would be there. They actually were 2-3 in groups, so they got that the top 3 spot because of a tiebreaker, which is interesting. And then we have London, who did not win a match in Stage 1. In the major, they had to replace Alex with Zed because Alex went back to Europe for personal reasons. Zed steps in on short notice, and they come close to winning a series against Toronto, but fall short, finish top 12. And today we got some roster mania in regard to London. Parasite, 2013 world champion, was dropped by the team in place of Paul X, who is a Challengers player, very good player, who I believe is rumored to, before Stage 1, there was a rumor that he denied London because he didn't want to go on a short-term contract with the team. But apparently he's he's ready to go. He will be competing with Zed and who's on their team? Paul X, Zed,
Dylan and Shawnee.
Dylan, and Shawnee, and yeah, so that'll be the team for London in stage 2. Who do you got between the Gorillas and the Royal Ravens?
Yeah, so I'm gonna pick the Gorillas. I don't think London get their first match win here. Um, if Paul X comes out and just absolutely fries, that might be the way that they're able to do it. But I think Gorillas has that chemistry. They're a structured team, especially in search. They should be able to excel considering London's lack of practice still with another roster iteration. Um, London didn't confirm today that Zed is actually playing, but
Yeah, we're assuming it
yeah,
because I don't think there's been confirmation that Alex has returned to America, and I'm not sure what kind of quarantine he would have to go through because of COVID and everything.
yeah. So we're assuming that the lineup's going to be Dylan, Shawnee, Paul X, and Zed. But again, we've been talking about the issue in London since the beginning has been just their lack of practice as these multiple roster iterations compared to these other teams that have been around since the offseason. They had Zero with his visa issues. That's how Parasite gets thrown in the mix. That four-man team of Parasite, Alex, Dylan, and Shawnee, doesn't have as much practice compared to the other teams. They go winless in group stage, and then Zed gets thrust in there in place of Alex, so it's another roster iteration. And now we have stage 2 with Paul X for Parasite. It's constant changes, and I think that's until they find a set lineup, or maybe even they get the visa issues fixed and they get their intended starting lineup in there, London might continue to struggle. But I do think Paul X is a promising player. He had success obviously with Leicester and the NA Challengers team this year. They won the first 4 cups in NA back to back to back to back. So it'll definitely be exciting to see him make his CDL debut, but I am going to pick the Gorillas to take the series.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think LIG is a more coordinated team, and if London had an off season to practice and prepare, maybe that would be different. But the reality is they don't. They had probably a week and a half to really practice with this roster if they signed Paul X immediately after stage 1 ended. And yeah, it's unfortunate because London was a very interesting team last year. They had a really good champs run, and they just haven't had luck on their side for this stage because of COVID and visa issues, and that's like it really sucks for them. It sucks for their fans to not really be able to see the roster that management wanted to put forward, but they'll have to make do, and hopefully they can win a match at this stage or do something at the major or something. Yeah, so it's unfortunate, but we move on to the second match on Sunday, Atlanta FaZe versus Toronto Ultra. This was an interesting matchup in stage 1 because this was during Super Week, and we were both talking, well, what if Toronto comes out, they beat Optic, and then they play FaZe, and they compete with them? Well, they actually didn't win any of those matches during Super Week, and FaZe obviously won all of their matches in stage 1. Who do you have FaZe versus Ultra?
Gotta go FaZe 3-0. Tough week for the Ultra, obviously. They have their struggles in stage 1, and they pull off those wins at the major place methods, and they're immediately they're being thrown the Thieves and FaZe to kick off first week of stage 2. So
Yeah.
not exactly the easiest schedule for them. Let me look at their group real quick for stage 2. I already lost it. So Group A is FaZe, LA Thieves, New York, Toronto, the Gorillas, and London.
Mm-hmm.
So, obviously New York came in third at the major, but it might be a toss-up for the 2 seed there between LA Thieves and New York. So either way, they're playing definitely 2 of the top 3 teams in their group immediately in this first week. So definitely not an easy schedule, and especially with a new team. I just think FaZe is too strong at this point, and unless Insight's dropping like a 3.0, just like absolutely going off, and that might not even be enough to be honest. But yeah, I think FaZe should take this one pretty easily.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, I'm not going to pick FaZe against FaZe until they show me a reason why. And Toronto, we don't really know what they'll look like with Insight, like you said, but from what we saw in Stage 1, even if Insight is a considerable upgrade to Methods, I mean, I don't think it's enough to beat FaZe unless
Yeah.
FaZe has an off day. And to kind of piggyback off of what you were saying, for Toronto's schedule, I mean, that's just kind of the reality of having 6 teams in your group in a 12-team league. Everybody is supposed to be competitive, although they do have London in their group. I mean, to be honest, it's going to be tough to beat Subliners, LA Thieves, Atlanta, maybe even LAG. All of those teams finished within the top 6 in the major, and it's just going to be difficult to win in that group. But even if they were in the other group, they would have to beat Optic. They would have to beat Florida, Minnesota. So in Dallas, they would. The reality is they just need to step up, and especially control. I don't think they have a very good control record. Which, although it is the least played game mode, losing that nearly every time is horrible because you're always trying to make up ground in a series. And I mean, hopefully they can fix that in Stage 2. And finally, to round out the week, we have the LA Thieves versus the New York Subliners. This was actually the first match for the Subliners in Stage 1. They were swept by the Thieves, but then obviously finished above them in the major. So who do you have between the Thieves and the Subliners?
Yeah, so the Thieves did sweep them, but that was one of the closest series we saw
Yeah.
early on in the season. And we were just kind of touching on it with that group right now of FaZe, LA Thieves, Subliners, and the way FaZe have been looking. You got to expect this is the battle for second place in that group, at least on paper. So um, I think it's going to be 3-2. I think the Thieves probably take it, but I'm going to pick New York. Something's telling me to pick New York.
Yeah, this is the hardest match to pick for me because I really believe in New York. I picked them to go 4-1 in Stage 1. They ended up going 3-2, and they exceeded my expectations at the major. But I'm gonna go with LA. I think this is a really close match. As you said, that first series, although it was a 3-0 sweep for LA, I believe the hard point was within 10 points. The S&D was 6-5 and a round 5 control. That's that's incredibly close. Similarly to I was gonna say Dallas and what's it? Dallas and New York, but that's not what I was thinking about at all.
That was a reverse sweep.
Yeah, but I just think LA should be better than they are, and New York probably overdid it at the major. I think they showed what the top is for their ceiling is, and I don't think LA did, and I think LA will win this series.
Yeah, I think either way, just looking at the schedule on paper right now, I think I think Mutineers versus Rocker, and then Thieves versus Subliner should be the two closest matchups of this first week.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the matches on paper, there should be a lot of blowouts. FaZe versus New York might be a close match, but I still think FaZe, and most people are gonna think FaZe is gonna take that one. But yeah, I think those two matches in particularly, it's interesting because this is the last match on Sunday. It should definitely be one of the closest matchups of this first week.
Yep. And now we're going to go to a different topic. We are through the first week of Stage 2. There will be several more weeks before the second major of the season, which should be exciting. The first major was really exciting. We saw some upsets. And we saw a lot of great Call of Duty. And hopefully we don't have to go through another Super Week because
I was
that
just
wore
gonna
me
say.
out. Because I don't want to do that again. But maybe 10 matches a week would be nice.
Yep.
So let's talk about. Well, first of all, who do you think's going to win Stage 2? I don't think Mike has sent this out in the pick'em yet, but this was something we picked before Stage 1.
Who I think is gonna win like the stage 2 major?
Yeah, who do you think's going to win the major?
I mean, I think you have to pick FaZe at this point. Assuming you're gonna pick FaZe too, so I'm gonna go with something different. I think FaZe wins Group A for stage 2. Then I'm gonna pick Optic to win Group B. Obviously, most people looking at that Dallas versus Optic rematch whenever that happens, that'll likely be the match that determines Group B. So I'm gonna pick Optic to win Group B, and I'll say Optic wins the major, just to be different. But I
Yeah.
think the logical pick is Atlanta, but I'll just pick Optic for the hell of it.
Well, I think I would say that Optic, if I had to pick a team to beat FaZe, it would be Optic. I'm not going to do that because it doesn't make a lot of sense. My pick'em is actually doing really well because I'm picking FaZe, so I'm gonna keep.
No, Mike did send out the pick, and I picked FaZe to win stage 2 for sure.
I just don't remember that. He sends it to me, and then I fill it out, and I completely forget about it. So, I'd say FaZe wins stage 2.
Yeah.
I mean,
it would be surprising if they don't.
So if FaZe and Optic meet in winners finals, kind of like FaZe and Empire did, and say FaZe wins and goes to the grand finals, do you think Optic would beat Dallas or LA or New York in the losers finals?
I don't know. I think the only way we'll be able to answer that is when we see that Optic versus Dallas rematch in stage 2, because that was obviously one of the closest matches of the major when Optic played the Empire in the winners bracket semifinals. Dallas won 3-2. Most notably, Dallas wins in round 5, game 5, round 11. But Dallas also won both hard points, and Optic is considered to be a much better respawn team than Search team. So if Optic is able to figure out their recipe for hardpoint against Dallas, that could be what helps them push them over the edge in that regard. But I still think, we touched on it last episode where even if the power rankings are FaZe, Dallas, Optic at this point, it's like FaZe up here, then Dallas and Optic are like the difference between Dallas and Optic is not even close to the difference between FaZe and everybody else right now.
Yeah. Josh said in the chat, real concern, you go winless in stage 2, 0-10, 0 to 10 points max going into stage 2, and only make T8 make champs at the end of the year. That's a problem if you're London or Seattle that you need to wrestle with ASAP. That would be a huge problem because it was a little different in last season where you didn't have to deal with every team being at every event, but now you have 5 teams in your group and you have another 6 teams in the other group, and there's a possibility that you could play any single one of them at the major. If you get to the end of stage 2 and you have 20, 30 points while the top teams have 200, 300 points, that's a huge problem.
No, nobody should be at 200, I don't think, even because
what doesn't FaZe have over 100 now?
Yeah, FaZe has 125, and they went 5-0 in group play and then came in first, so that's the most you can get in a stage.
But they would have 220.
They'd have 250 if they repeat that, exactly. Yeah, so that's the most anybody can have after stage 2. But regardless, it's still, if FaZe is at 250 and London goes winless again, that's basically an insurmountable mountain at that point.
Yeah, and it's really bad for this season. Unlike last season where they changed it for champs, only the top 8 teams get to champs, I believe, this year. And if you're Seattle and London, you're kind of like, okay, like, unless we start winning events, we're kind of screwed here. And not getting to champs has to be crushing because some of these guys, ever since they've been pros, They've been to every single champs. Obviously, champs was a different format when the CDL wasn't around, but to not even get to a $1 million plus tournament, that's really bad.
Yeah. I think at that point, obviously anything can happen in stage two. Just looking at these matchups on paper right now, it looks like we think Seattle goes 0-2 and London goes 0-1 in this first week, which doesn't really help their case. But if they continue to struggle in stage two, I think we're talking about FaZe being at 250. That's got to be like something they can't even really look at that. Like they got to be like, okay, we can't even hit that. What's eighth place at? Eighth place, right now there's a three-way tie for eighth place with 30 points. It's obviously going to be a little bit more depending on what happens, most likely. But that's kind of when you're in that point down at the very bottom. I think you got to be looking at, okay, how can we get to eighth place, not how can we get up to first place.
Yeah. So you said earlier in the show you are a big fan of consistency because it builds chemistry, and chemistry is a vital thing for a team. If you're Seattle or London, it doesn't really matter what team, but you get to the end of stage two and say you're about 40 points out from eighth place, and you're obviously not going to catch up to anybody in the top four. Do you make a roster change then, or do you just ride it out? Do you go through stage three with that same roster?
Well, I think that comes down to individual performances. Is the team, working as a unit? Because obviously, it's a little different than where like challengers they have their one tournament on the weekend and then they get like top 32 or something. They blow it up and try to form another squad. That's obviously not really a thing in CDL now with contracts and everything. But I definitely think we've already seen London make a handful of roster changes, so it would be very possible for them to make another one. Maybe Afro or Zero finally get their visa, and
Mm-hmm.
they're able to swap something in. Who knows? But I think definitely, man, I think if Seattle continues to struggle, they come in last place again at the stage two major, for example. I think they have to consider at least making a roster change. Will they do it? I don't know, because last year they ran into issues where the organization allegedly wasn't wanting to spend money on these young players. I think that's what the rumor going around was at that time. So I'm not really sure if they actually will, but if they continue to struggle, they have to at least explore that option, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't know if the scenario changes. Obviously, we did hear those rumors that they couldn't make a big change. Like, they couldn't go out and get, say, Gunless, who was riding the bench in Chicago.
Yeah.
But maybe it changes now that you have those shorter term contracts. I know Parasite, I believe, was initially signed to like that 2 week contract, and
Yep.
maybe they do that. I don't know what the solution is, but Seattle specifically, because London is a different case where they've already made several roster
Yeah.
changes just out of necessity. But Seattle, I mean, this is 2 seasons in a row. They were one of the worst teams in the league last year, and then they have a chance to be one of the worst teams in the league this year. If you get to the end of stage two and you're, say, at 20 or 30 points, which would assume that they win one or two matches in stage two, I mean, I would think you would have to make a roster change. Like, how would you not? If you win, say, 3 matches over 2 stages, which would be at least 12 matches, so you're 3-9. How do you not make a roster change at that point?
Yeah. It's definitely going to be a situation we got to keep our eyes on. I mean, Toronto made a roster change with methods, and they placed better than Seattle at the last major. So anything's possible. I think that'll be definitely something we got to keep our eyes on. But there's a lot of Call of Duty to be played before we get to that point.
Yeah, we don't have any more topics, but if anyone wants to ask questions in the chat or bring up a topic, we will stick around for a few more minutes and talk about that. Yeah, so I think that's all the topics we have, right?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on it in each of the match previews for those specific teams. But just to reiterate again, in case you weren't here when we were talking about those games, Some of the highlight changes that we're seeing coming into this week, we're presuming that Insight is going to make his CDL debut for the Toronto Ultra. Methods has stated that he's been benched, but we haven't had any confirmation from Toronto of that, which, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think Methods would say it if it's not happening. So
Mm.
it definitely seems like he's benched, but we haven't had any confirmation of that from Toronto or who's actually replacing him. All signs indicate that it will be Insight, so we should see him make his debut. And then Paul X, a talented amateur player from North America, should be making his debut for the London Royal Ravens on Sunday. The only other things we were going to talk about were the map rotation changes, which we kind of already touched on. But we've got Apocalypse Hardpoint coming in for Crossroads, and then Express S&D, a staple search and destroy map from Black Ops 2, is officially joining the CDL and will be replacing Garrison Search, which for me is a blessing because I absolutely hated Garrison Search, and I don't care what Benzie said, Garrison was worse than Miami.
Yeah, what you don't replace Miami, especially when all the players don't want it to be replaced.
Yep.
Yeah, so Trimmer said thoughts on Apocalypse, Challengers Season 2 start, with the Season 1 champs NYSL, who Hydra, I believe, is starting for now. They went 0-2 to start. New Look Wester with Haggy, they're 2-0, and Easter 2-0. I actually don't know who Easter is. If it's Profizi's team, I know that was like a while ago. He called themselves
I
Easter.
think that's no, I don't know who that is actually. I think that happened like tonight though. I think the elite matches were going on tonight.
Like right before we went on, I saw that NYSL had lost. NYSL Academy, excuse me.
Too. But yeah, so thoughts on Apocalypse? I still haven't actually played it. From what I've seen, it looks like a visually pleasing map, so I'm excited for that. I definitely think it's going to be interesting to see which teams are quick to adapt to, having this new map change in Hardpoint. Some teams, just thinking about coaching staffs and stuff, some teams might capitalize on that more than others, and it'll definitely be something you want to watch out for, especially in this first week right away. But I'm really excited to see Express Search and Destroy back in pro play. I get super excited to just think about having a best of 5 where the first 3 maps are Raid, Hardpoint, Express S&D, and Raid Control. Obviously, Control wasn't around in Black Ops 2, but that's a Black Ops 2 series. And if we eventually get Standoff, seeing Raid, Express, and Standoff all in the same series would be absolutely incredible. But yeah, I'm really excited to see both of these new maps and how they play at the pro level.
Yeah, I would just like to see some new maps. I think every season there should be at least 1 or 2 maps added in during the season, because it can get, especially by the end of the season where you've watched for 8-9 months and you see, checkmate, 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 and you're like, oh my god, please stop. But yeah, challengers, I don't really pay attention to challengers, but I mean, it's interesting just because NYSL Academy was so good last season, or last stage, whatever they call it, and now Hydra is coming over, and he's basically inserted in the team just because they had nothing else to do with him. I don't think they were planning on dropping Glow Frosty after winning the Elite Series, but yeah. Josh said, which team who did good in Season 1 are you expecting to suck by the end of this season?
I guess it depends on what you're defining as doing well.
I mean, I guess if they finished in the top 4, like, is there any in the, or top 5, I guess, we'll say LA Thieves, NYSL, Optic, FaZe, and Dallas. Are any of those 5 teams do you see dropping off considerably as we end this, or go near the end of the season?
Not really. Certainly not FaZe, Optic, or Dallas. I think they should be the consensus top 3 for most of the year. And I think we've seen before with the 100 Thieves brand, and especially teams led by Slasher, they typically start out a little bit slow and get better as the year progresses. So that trend might continue in Cold War. I have no reason to really doubt that squad at this point, so I don't think they're going to fall off. And then that would leave New York, and they just came in third. So I guess you could say that they might be the most likely candidate to drop off just in comparison to what they've achieved already. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to write them off already. So I don't really think. And those teams, I guess, you could go to the Gorillas because they got top six in the major and say the
Yeah,
Gorillas might not consistently be a top six team. I think
yeah,
that's the closest you can get
I-
to answering that. But that's still, I wouldn't consider, they went 2-3, we said in group play, right?
yeah.
So
They
like
have a
you can't
losing
really,
record in stage one.
yeah. So I don't know. It's a tough question. I think there's the league is super competitive, so there's always going to be the potential for upsets. But I really think, especially by the end of the year, we're going to know who the top teams are and who aren't the top teams.
Hmm. If you were the GM of Seattle or London, what would you do? For London, I would just hope and pray that season three is better and would just chalk it and move on. I mean, there's nothing that they really can do. Like zero, they can't speed up visa issues because this happens all the time in esports. And Alex going home for personal issues, that's something out of their control that they couldn't do anything about. I mean, they can just hope for the best for this addition of their roster. But I mean, I don't see anything they can do. Or Seattle, on the other hand, they can make a roster change and bring up someone like Decimate or I don't know, like a really good challengers player.
Yeah, he said if you had to make a change, who you dropping and who you picking up.
Well, Seattle, I would
Uh
definitely pick Pristini to drop, right?
yeah, it's tough. Statistically, he's definitely been underperforming this season, and
He plays a shit
one
role,
thing,
though, to be fair.
yeah, he's gonna have a ton of engagement. He's going in first. Um, I do think John would be an interesting option for Seattle, depending on how he's performing in challengers. He has some experience there, and obviously he's a world champion, world champs MVP. So that could be a potential. It looks like Seattle in the offseason, they obviously went for this route of more veteran players when they're signing guys like Looney, Pristini, and Gunless to go with Octane. So um, if Seattle doesn't want to go for a younger talent option, John could be an option. Same with Saints. We talked about that briefly too on uh, New York Academy. That could be an interesting option. Or you had like guys like Venom, some of these like up and coming sub players that they could take a chance on. But yeah, I feel like that would be they would have to try and get a dominant sub slayer for Seattle. At least that seems like on paper the change you would want to make. And for London, I mean, they're already changing so much. I feel like one thing, if they continue to struggle, you might have to look at replacing either Dylan or Shawnee, just because they've been on that team throughout all of these other changes, and if things aren't getting better, you might have to look to them. I don't really know exactly what I would change in particular, because then you're looking at trying to bring in another fast aggressive sub for Dylan or a main AR for Shawnee. So that's two very different options. But London has at least shown that they're making changes. Whether they're forced into it or not is a different story. But they're at least trying to figure stuff out. So I'm not really sure exactly what the specific fix for London would be, but uh, like I kind of just said, if they continue to struggle, you might have to look to one of these other guys.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting after stage two what teams decide to do because
Yep.
the end date for stage two is April 4th. Champs, we presume, will be in August. We have 5 stages. So, there's no like technical halfway point. It'll be like in the middle of stage three. But after stage two, what do these teams at the bottom decide to do? Or maybe not even at the bottom because we saw with Toronto that they made a move despite finishing like in the lower third of the league, but not near what London or Seattle did. Um, but yeah, these teams are going to have to make a big decision. Sometime last season, we saw some teams like, okay, we can't make a move like this, or we're just not going to. What else do we have?
Trevor just said, do we get standoff pre-champs? I certainly hope
Probably.
we do. If I had to put money on it, I would probably say it's not going to happen just so I don't set my hopes up to be crushed. But
Hmm.
uh, I certainly hope we end up getting it. It would be awesome.
Yep. To be honest, Toronto should have lost to Minnesota at the major. I mean, a lot of teams should lose, I guess, but it's just about, sometimes you get lucky, or sometimes you just pull out a series that you really shouldn't have. But like I said, the Atlanta Paris series was one of those series for me where Paris should have won, all things considered. But you can't choke maps and allow a good team like FaZe to hang around.
Yep. I'm just trying to think real quick. Looking at some other options, Kismet is a sub option who could, potentially get a shot. Uh, he was on Paris last year.
Hmm.
Kind of off topic, but I'm just like looking through some of these amateur teams right now. For potential options, I believe Standy is another like up and coming sub player. I've certainly heard his name before, and I believe he's a sub, but I could be wrong with that. Same with Royalty. Obviously, he's been around longer, but he's always known for having a high sense and being one of those cracked guys. So he could be an option if teams are looking to throw somebody in. And then obviously we already brought up guys like Venom, John, etc. So there's definitely plenty of options in amateurs if teams are looking to make changes. It just comes down to the fact of A, are they actually going to pull the trigger, and B, who do you decide to go with?
Yeah, I think John's always very interesting because nobody really knows what happened last season. Go from being on Luminosity to not playing for the entire season, and he's been in challengers, but he hasn't, won anything or done anything spectacular. At least from a team perspective, he's playing with. He played in the Stage 2 qualifier, the Elite Stage 2 qualifier with fellow Jerd and Gravity,
Yep,
which
I think that's a pretty solid team.
yeah, I mean, Jerd is also a name that just
Yeah,
completely seemed to drop off the face of the earth, despite being, one of the best European players of all time and being on London all of last season and getting benched last season. So for and Fellow is Dallas's sub, and
yeah.
Gravity, I believe, was FaZe's sub, although they obviously never had to use him last season.
He was just on FaZe Academy last year. I don't. Was he a sub? He might have been. I think him and Journey might have been. I don't really remember.
Yeah, I
Obviously, it didn't matter.
yeah.
And then they got Sib this year, but unless something drastic
He's
happens,
never
probably don't
seeing
see.
yeah, he's never
Yeah.
coming up to that roster. So, will the CDL expand going into the next COD? Thoughts on next title being developed by Sledgehammer to give Treyarch IW some breathing room post pandemic? You want to take this?
Sure. So I think, will the CDL expand? I hope so.
I would
Um,
expect it to.
at least go to 16 teams would be ideal in my opinion. Um, so I want to see it expand. I think it'll be good, but depending on what happens throughout the rest of the year, it might be tough for them to sell franchise spots at the price they're looking for if we're not able to have live events, because that's such a big aspect of it. Although we saw earlier today with the Activision
Hmm.
Blizzard layoffs report that they want to focus on online components of competition. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's something along those lines. So online could be a bigger factor in the CDL moving forward, even in the post-COVID world, which is definitely something interesting to think about. But at the end of the day, I think the CDL will expand eventually. It might not necessarily happen next year, but I certainly hope it will. To at least 16 teams. I think that's a good point. To just add 4 teams and then maybe add more continuously over the years. Um, And then thoughts on the next title being developed by Sledgehammer. I don't know if
That's confirmed.
that's been confirmed. I think it's been rumored. He also just added, do you guys want to see World War II 2 or AW2? That's an easy one for me. I definitely do not want to see AW2. Keep my boots on the ground, please. So yeah, I think until we know more about that, it's kind of hard to speculate. But definitely, if Sledgehammer is developing the game, so be it. Um, we've talked about it a little bit on the pod already, but Treyarch has at least been communicating that they're trying to fix stuff, but we still haven't really seen very much weapon balancing in Cold War. So that doesn't really bode well for going into Sledgehammer. Will they be able to improve on that? It's to be determined if it actually happens, but that's certainly something that we're going to have to look at, regardless of who's developing the next game. With so many issues, we got the snaking debate going on, stuff about with so many GAs because we're not getting that developer support or weapon balancing. Regardless of who ends up developing the next game, that's going to be a key point that all Call of Duty fans are going to want to look to.
Yeah, the lack of developer support in terms of weapon tuning is extremely disappointing. This is the second year of the franchise league. I believe it's the fifth year of an Activision-backed league. You had the CWL before this, and now we have the
Mm-hmm.
CDL. But for us to be at a point where there are so many GAs, and basically play the entire league, the players in the league are deciding what the meta is. That's not good. In no other esport does that happen. And that's not really the fault of the players. They have to do what they feel is best for the game because they're playing it all the time. They're playing it competitively. But the fact that it comes to that, and for the Slasher World League to essentially be turned to life, it's not good. There needs to be weapon tuning. My desire would be to have weapon tuning after every stage and then give players 2 weeks off between a stage. And it doesn't need to be like this massive update, like where everything has changed, but there needs to be some tuning outside of the stages so players can get used to it before they go into official matches. And then, say you go through stage two, and then after stage two, there's more weapon tuning, and we see a progression throughout the season. We just don't see that. And when we do see weapon tuning, it's usually before like a big event or before like right the day of CDL matches, which is obviously horrible and it doesn't help anything. And I mean, hopefully we just get more, but it's really tiring to keep talking about it and saying, "Oh, I hope we get developer support," when it should just happen.
Yeah, I mean, just real quick, we don't want to harp on this too long, and we got to wrap up soon.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think GAs are important to the extent of the players know what's most competitive, and they want, at the end of the day, they want competitive Call of Duty to succeed. Obviously, it's their livelihood. So, it shouldn't have to be to the extent that it's at, but it's always going to be like some factor. And I think regardless of, even if Treyarch was out here coming out with updates every single week, there would still be something where it's just not happening fast enough, and it's like the players are going to take matters into their own hands. So I'm a little bit, I don't want to say disagree, but I just think I'm a little more lenient towards GAs to an extent. But it's just, like you said, at the end of the day, we got to get to that point where the developers are able to show the support that so many people think Call of Duty deserves. It's one of the most successful gaming franchises in the world, and obviously, in my opinion, it's one of the most successful esports, or most popular esports, however you want to word it. It's a great game to watch. I've enjoyed it for years, and I just want to see it succeed at the end of the day too. Just like all these pros who are trying to do
Mm-hmm.
everything they can to put a good product on screen for the fans.
Yeah. Well, and my thing is like I don't want the players to decide exactly what's going to happen. Like if I could, I would have someone like Aches or JCap. Rambo Ray used to work for Sledgehammer. To have a veteran in the competitive scene be able to give their input and say, well, this is what the players would like, or like this is what would make it the most competitive in terms of weapon balancing, rule sets, that kind of stuff. To have someone with that expertise to tell developers, like, hey, this is what the competitive scene would like. I think that is the dream, but it's just not happening, and I don't know if it'll ever happen. I hope it does, but we'll see. If there, ooh, I think
I
that's
think we're
about
good.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that does it for episode 5 of the Ego Chow podcast. Make sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever podcasting app you use. You can also subscribe on YouTube. We'll upload this video tomorrow, and this podcast will be uploaded everywhere tomorrow, Wednesday, March 17th. So yeah, thank you for joining us. And Bink, you want to sign off?
Yeah. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We appreciate the support as always. And I'm gonna end up repeating myself, but gotta do it. Thanks for tuning in, and always remember to send the chow.